Hi, I'm Keziah. They told me to stand by the door and smile, said it was just to help. My sister laughed at me, at her own promotion party. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing I had been their story all along. Their proof of goodness. The deaf sister, the loyal shadow. They used my silence to build her spotlight. I gave everything, and they took my name off the one thing I created. So I finally asked myself, what happens when the gatekeeper stops opening the door? I didn't even know there was a dress code until I walked through the front archway and felt eyes scanning me from every direction. The Lakewood Grand Hall wasn't what I expected. Gold-trimmed chandeliers, velvet-lined walls, and that smell of too much perfume trying to cover up too much money. I wore a simple navy coat, the one I always wear when I want to disappear. I thought I'd slip in quietly, maybe stand in the back, clap at the right moments, then go home. But Mom had other plans. "Kez!" she called before I even made it past the entryway. Her voice had that edge, fake sweet with just enough steel under it to cut through me. "Come with me, sweetheart." I followed her to a side hallway near the coat room. That's when she handed it to me, folded in a neat square, like it was something to be proud of. A black polo shirt with the words, "Deaf Support Security Volunteer," stitched in white thread on the chest, and below it, a lanyard with a laminated tag. My name wasn't even on it. "They're short on staff," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Brindis pulled every string to make this night perfect. You'll be helping people get checked in. Smooth things out at the door, that's all." I just stood there, holding that shirt. It felt heavier than it looked. "It's not a big deal," she added, patting my shoulder, like I was some child confused at a fire drill. "Don't make this about yourself." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and changed in the restroom. The shirt was snug, not made for someone shaped like me. It scratched at my neck. The name tag swung awkwardly when I walked, slapping against my chest like punctuation. I tried to tuck my hair behind my ears, but even that made me feel exposed. The main entrance was wide open by then. Guests began arriving, heels clicking on tile, laughter echoing in waves. No one looked at me twice. Most didn't look at all. I handed out brochures, checked off names, waved to people who didn't wave back. One little girl, maybe 6 or 7, stopped and pointed at my badge. "Is she really deaf?" she asked her father. He didn't answer, just tugged her along like I was part of the furniture. For the next hour, I smiled like I was supposed to. I nodded when people said things I couldn't fully hear. My hearing loss isn't total, but in rooms like this, with clinking glasses and 100 voices bouncing off the walls, it might as well be. I've gotten good at faking it, reading lips, filling in blanks, pretending I caught the joke just in time to laugh. The problem is, they think that means I'm fine. And they love that. They love the image of me being resilient, strong. They call it inspiring. But they don't invite me to the table. They invite me to the door. When Brindis arrived, she didn't even glance my way. She floated in like she owned the damn building, wrapped in some designer green dress with her curls pinned perfectly, flanked by executives and photographers. Everyone clapped. I clapped too, from my post, next to the fire extinguisher and a rack of umbrellas. She passed within 3 feet of me. I half raised a hand, but stopped myself. She didn't look over. Of course she didn't. My chest felt tight, but not like sadness. More like a quiet knot, not pain, just compression. I kept doing my job. I kept doing what they asked. And somewhere in the quiet between "welcome" and "enjoy your evening," a memory knocked loose. Snow, years ago. We were maybe 10 and 13, bundled up in winter coats in our old backyard. I'd built a snow fort, lopsided sure, but it stood. Brindis came stomping through with her sled and smashed the side. "Why'd you do that?" I'd asked, voice muffled under my scarf. She pulled off her mittens. "If you can't talk right, don't ruin the game for everyone." I hadn't thought about that in years. The night stretched. My fingers went numb from holding the brochures. My smile went rigid. Later, I overheard one of Brindis's coworkers saying, "Her sister's helping at the door? That's sweet. Sweet." As if it were charity. As if I were a prop. There were name cards on the tables. Gold calligraphy, centered. I didn't have one. I checked twice, quietly, just to be sure. There wasn't even a chair marked for me. I was supposed to stay by the door, like a ghost ushering the living. The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the tribute video. Laughter faded into hushed reverence, and I stood there, frozen in that shirt, nameless badge pressing against my skin. I didn't know it yet, but tonight wasn't just about her promotion. It was about my erasure. The video started playing just as I stepped further into the ballroom. One of the servers must have taken pity on me because he quietly nodded me past the guest list line with a discreet gesture. I didn't thank him out loud. Just a slight nod and a forced smile. That was all I had left. I hugged the back wall. It smelled like lavender polish and overcooked salmon. Around me, people settled into their chairs, leaning toward one another, whispering and chuckling in that careful cocktail party way, just enough to feel superior, not rude. Then her voice cut through the room. Brindis. Standing at the mic with that fake polished laugh she used around upper management, she launched into some story about early career challenges and how support from home helped her become the leader she is today. People clapped. I didn't. My hands were still, gripping the hem of my shirt to keep them from shaking. Then she turned toward me. "This is my sister, Keziah," she said, flashing a smile like I was a novelty she'd dusted off just for tonight. "She's always supported me, in her own quiet way." I felt every head swivel in my direction. She wasn't done. "She can't hear well," she added with a light chuckle. "So just smile and wave." Laughter followed. Not loud, not cruel. Worse. It was soft, polite, like I was an oddity people weren't sure how to handle. I didn't wave, I didn't move. I didn't know humiliation could feel this still. From across the room, a man in a gray suit leaned toward Brindis. I could see his mouth move. I couldn't hear his words exactly, but I caught enough. "Wait, is she family? I thought she was staff." She didn't even hesitate. "Kind of both," she said. "She likes to feel useful. Let's not confuse her." Let's not confuse her. As if my mind was the problem, not her ego. I watched her turn back to her audience, continue her speech, bask in the glow of curated admiration like nothing had happened. That was the moment something cracked. Not loudly, not violently. Just enough. I remembered a year ago. She'd asked me to help review a clause in a contract she didn't understand. Something about international licensing and non-compete terms. I spent 2 nights researching, checking legal references, making sure she didn't sign something she'd regret. She never mentioned it again. Tonight, I was the help. I slipped out of the ballroom as the applause rose again. My footsteps were quiet against the carpeted hallway, but the echo in my chest was thunder. I found a narrow hallway beside the restrooms, cooler, dimmer. From the shadows, I watched her through the open door. She was still glowing, laughing at the right beats, hands gesturing like she'd trained in a mirror. It used to be easier to let her shine when I believed she still saw me. But now I knew better. There's a difference between being humble and being invisible, and I was tired of disappearing so she could feel big. I reached into my purse, fumbling past a pack of tissues and an old lip balm until my fingers brushed against the flash drive. It was small, almost weightless, but I could feel what it meant. On that drive was the full draft of the East Asia pitch she delivered 2 months ago, the one that secured her promotion. She'd sent me her bullet points at 11:17 p.m. on a Thursday. "Can you help make this sound smarter?" she'd texted. I stayed up until 3 a.m., pulling together market data, tailoring language, tightening slides. She said, "Thanks," the next morning. That was it. Tonight, she'd said it was all hers. I closed my fist around the flash drive and leaned back against the wall. I didn't want to destroy her. I just didn't want to keep hiding behind her. That's when I heard a light tap near my elbow. I turned. It was Aveline, one of the younger women from the comms team. I recognized her from the HR orientation I'd briefly helped Brindis review months ago. She handed me a glass of water, no words, just a soft smile. I nodded. That was the first time that night I felt like someone saw me, not as a project or a lesson in patience, but just a person. I pulled out my phone and typed, "Thanks for the water. You're the only one who's treated me like I'm here." I didn't send it, but I saved it in drafts. Maybe I'd send it later. Maybe. I stayed in that hallway a while longer, listening to the muffled rhythm of celebration echoing from the ballroom. Every cheer, every toast, it all blurred into one long drone, like a movie I'd seen too many times and finally understood the ending. They called me a gatekeeper, maybe I am. But tonight I decide who gets to walk through what door. I stayed in that hallway longer than I meant to, long enough for the room to shift back into noise, toasts, and clinking glasses. My fingers still pressed around the flash drive in my coat pocket, its plastic edges digging slightly into my palm. Something about that small sting kept me grounded. Eventually, I slipped back into the corridor toward the restroom. Not because I needed to use it, but because I needed air that wasn't soaked in perfume and champagne. The hallway leading to the ladies' room was quiet, tucked between the service exit and the private coat room. I stepped inside the bathroom, letting the soft click of the door closing behind me dull everything else. The lighting was softer here, frosted bulbs above the sinks, a pale beige tile that made the space feel like a doctor's office. Empty. I took the stall at the end, sat down, not on the toilet, but just sat, arms folded across my chest, head against the divider. That's when I heard them come in. The door swung open with the rhythm of two familiar voices mid-conversation. I recognized them instantly. Brindis. Marlene. They didn't know I was in there. "I just hope she doesn't do something stupid," Brindis muttered. "God, I'm already getting enough sympathy comments tonight. I don't need people reminding me she's standing out there like some unpaid mascot." "You're overthinking it," Mom said. "She should feel lucky you let her be here at all. I told you. Without you, she'd still be sorting paper at that temp agency." My breath caught, but not in shock. It was more like confirmation, the kind that doesn't stab but sinks. "She's got no real direction," Mom continued. "You've got a name now, a real title. People respect you. Don't let her mess that up." And then came the line that gutted me clean. "You've carried her your whole life, Brindis. They should be thanking you for it." I closed my eyes, leaned harder into the metal stall wall. I could hear my own pulse. My mouth went dry. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect, yelling, fists clenched. I was just emptying out, because it wasn't a misunderstanding. They meant it. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I waited. After they flushed and left, laughing over some man's bad tie in the ballroom, I stayed seated another minute before standing. I didn't look at myself in the mirror right away. Instead, I reached into my coat and pulled out my phone. I opened the recording app and hit save. Not for drama, not for revenge. Just, in case the truth ever needed to speak louder than they did. I finally looked up and saw my reflection under that soft, forgiving bathroom light. I looked like someone I used to know, someone who let things slide, who stayed quiet to keep the peace. But I mouthed something at the mirror I hadn't dared say out loud. Not ever. "This is the last time you walk into a room small." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a promise. It was a line drawn in breath and resolve. On my way out of the bathroom, I passed by the gift table. There was a display in the center, a handmade shadow box, a collage of old family recipes, pressed flowers, and a letter from Grandma Edith framed inside. A little gold plaque at the bottom read, "Gift from Brindis, in loving memory." I stopped. Because I made that. I made that 2 months ago, on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I stayed up late mounting it, choosing each detail. I gave it to Brindis to deliver. She told me she'd present it on behalf of us both. Instead, she slapped her name on it. That's when something inside me rearranged. I thought about the job offer I turned down years ago, the one at the nonprofit in Duluth, because Grandma had just come home from the hospital and someone needed to be there. Brenda said she couldn't pause her career. So I did. I said, yes, I'll stay. Later, she told her company she delayed grad school for family obligations. She told them she cared for a disabled sister and an ailing grandmother, all while building her future. She told that story in her TEDx speech. Her story. It was mine. I stepped away from the gift table slowly, careful not to knock anything over. My hands were steady now. Strangely so. I didn't cry. I didn't boil over. I just saw it for what it was. Plain, bold, and written across every inch of this event. They never wanted me to speak. They wanted me to exist as their proof. Proof they were good, giving, noble, but never equal. Back in the hallway, I texted myself a note. They lied louder than I was ever allowed to tell the truth. And as I walked past the ballroom again, that same flash drive pulsed against my side. It wasn't time yet, but it would be soon. They thought I couldn't hear, but I've heard enough to never forget. As I made my way back toward the main ballroom, I passed a large standing mirror near the coat check. For a moment, I caught my own reflection. Still in that black volunteer polo, still wearing that plastic name tag like it belonged to someone else. I looked like I'd been hired for crowd control, not born into this family. The hallway forked just before the photo booth area, where people had started lining up for professional snapshots. Laughter floated down the hall, people fixing their collars, asking for filters, adjusting dresses that were never meant to be comfortable, only expensive. That's when I saw her. My mother. She wasn't looking for me. She was scanning the space like a hostess checking table settings before a wedding. When she finally spotted me, her mouth pulled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "There you are," she said, as if I'd wandered off like a child in a grocery store. "Come, sweetheart, the family photo's about to start." I followed her, slowly. Just before we reached the backdrop, she turned and pulled something from her purse, a folded ivory shawl. She placed it in my hands without asking. "You should wear this," she said, tapping my badge lightly with a manicured finger. "Covers the tag, and it'll look more polished." I looked down at it, then at her. "I thought I wasn't supposed to draw attention," I said, voice low. She chuckled, soft and clipped. "Let's not make this about you tonight, okay? Your sisters worked hard for this." Before I could answer, she was already walking away, calling out to the photographer. My mouth stayed shut. My fingers tightened around the shawl, but I didn't put it on. "Okay, folks, big smiles," the photographer said, raising his voice above the chatter. "Let's start with immediate family." People shuffled into place, shoulders angled, faces arranged like magazine covers. Brindis took her spot front and center, as expected. She tossed her hair once, caught the light just right. Executives and partners faded to the edge of the frame. Then, Mom turned back toward me. "Kez, honey, would you mind taking this one for us?" It wasn't a question. I felt something in my chest drop, not snap, not crack, just quietly fall. No one objected, no one even turned. So I nodded, stepped forward, and took the camera. My hands weren't shaking, not this time. I looked through the viewfinder, adjusted the focus, and pressed the shutter. The flash burst. Too bright. And for a split second, everything was white. When my vision returned, I checked the screen. The image was perfect, perfect in the way staged things always are. Except it was missing someone. I lowered the camera and handed it back to the assistant without a word. No one thanked me. They were already laughing at something Brindis had said. I stepped back from the group and moved toward the far side of the room, just outside the spotlight, beside a column where I could still see without being seen. That's when Aveline appeared. She didn't ask to sit. She just stood beside me for a moment, watching the crowd. Then, casually, she glanced my way. "You okay?" I gave her a single nod. She looked back at the group, then said quietly, "You're not just the one holding the camera, you know." And before I could respond, she was gone again, swallowed by the party. I looked back at the crowd. No one had noticed I was gone. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe that was the point. I leaned against the column and crossed my arms, letting the hum of conversation and clinking glasses fade into background noise. They hadn't needed Photoshop to erase me from that photo. They'd just done what they always did, ignored me. And I had let them. Until now. The lights in the ballroom dimmed again, this time for a toast I wasn't invited to hear. I stayed back, leaning against the same column, not out of exhaustion, but choice. From where I stood, I could see the catering staff moving trays of chocolate truffles to the dessert table. The music shifted into something upbeat and inoffensive, like everything else about this night. I was about to step toward the exit when Aveline reappeared. She moved casually, as if she were stretching her legs or avoiding a conversation she didn't want to have. We locked eyes for a second before she came to stand beside me again, hands folded. "You know that pitch Brindis won the award for?" she said, her voice light, as if talking about weather. I nodded, though I wasn't sure where she was going with it. Aveline pulled out her phone and tapped something, then turned the screen toward me. It was a screenshot of a shared company folder. My last name was clearly visible in the file title, Row Asia Strategy, V2, PPTX. "There's a version floating around the internal drive. Someone forwarded it to me by mistake," she said. "Apparently, it's been scrubbed since, but I keep backups." The air left my lungs in a quiet, measured exhale. I didn't need to ask. I knew what it was. I wrote that pitch. The data, the structure, the framing. Every section of that slide deck had passed through my hands. Brindis had sent me the bullet points, with no formatting, and a line that read, "Can you clean this up? It's due Monday morning. I'd worked through the weekend while Grandma coughed herself to sleep in the other room." Now it had her name on it. "She said she created it from scratch," Aveline added softly. "But I've seen your formatting before." I met Aveline's gaze. She didn't flinch. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Because I think you're the only person here who doesn't pretend anymore." Before I could answer, someone called her name from across the room and she walked away. Just like that. I didn't follow. I stayed rooted in that same spot, arms still crossed, head lowered just slightly, like a boxer waiting for the next round. But the bell didn't ring. Instead, I drifted down a quieter hallway near the green room where speakers prepped before taking the stage. Brindis had just wrapped up her panel, and I caught sight of her pulling off a lapel mic and handing it to a technician. Her voice was still buoyant, but her eyes darted around as if checking for someone she hoped wouldn't be there. She turned and found me standing 10 feet away. "Oh," she said, quickly recovering. "Kez, didn't expect you back here." I stepped forward calmly, but with purpose. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. "I saw the original file in the company server," I said, tone even. "It has my name on it. The pitch? The one you were praised for." Her mouth opened slightly, then pressed into a thin, performative smile. "Listen," she started, stepping closer. "We both know how these things work. The team only needs one point of contact. I was just trying to keep it streamlined." "You told them you wrote it alone." Brindis gave a short laugh that didn't match the situation. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is. Honestly, I thought we were past the whole credit thing. You always said you didn't care about recognition." I paused, then replied, "I said that when I thought you cared about the truth." She blinked. "You should be careful calling something yours," I added, "especially when it's traceable." The smile faded. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said plainly. "I'm warning you." We stood in silence. She didn't speak again, just stared. I walked away first. Back in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Aveline. She must have seen us talking. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Aveline, I think they see you now." That might scare them. I stared at the message, not because I doubted her, but because it felt like something shifted. Something irreversible. It wasn't rage that filled me. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something quieter, more exact. They'd spent so long pretending I didn't matter, that I wasn't sharp enough to notice or bold enough to act. But tonight, I let them see just enough. It wasn't a threat. It was a preview. I didn't go back to the ballroom right away. I took the longer route down the corridor behind the catering station, the kind of back hallway only staff usually used. It smelled faintly of dishwasher soap and burnt coffee. Safe. Neutral. I needed that neutrality. Around the corner near the storage area, there was a side table where someone had stashed a stack of event programs, half-empty soda cans, and a silver bowl of wrapped mints. I set my purse down next to them and reached inside. The manila folder was still there, creased at the edges now, from hours of being carried around like some kind of amulet. I'd brought it mostly out of habit, just in case. I hadn't planned to use it, but now, that just in case felt like a certainty. I pulled it open and skimmed through its contents, even though I already knew every page by heart. The original email thread, the unedited draft of the East Asia pitch, the PowerPoint with the creation timestamps. Everything that proved the truth, not just about that one presentation, but about a pattern. A pattern of taking, renaming, and polishing my work until it looked like hers. I could have dropped it off at the front desk anonymously. I could have handed it to HR on Monday, but none of those options felt right anymore. I slid the folder back into my bag and walked toward the family display table, the one set up near the ballroom entrance with floral arrangements and framed photos. At the center was a shadow box, a delicate glass frame with our grandmother's handwriting, clipped recipes, even one of her old handkerchiefs stitched into the background. A gold card in front read, "Gift from Brindis, in loving memory." I stopped cold. I made that. Every part of it, gluing the backing, ironing the handkerchief, scanning the recipes one by one, even the handwritten note I tucked behind the frame. She taught us how to taste before we spoke. Weeks ago, Brindis had come by the apartment, said she wanted to drop off extra vitamins for Grandma's old arthritis kit that she still hadn't thrown away. She saw the frame sitting on my coffee table, half wrapped in tissue. "This is beautiful," she'd said, turning it in her hands. I told her it wasn't finished. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. Now it had her name on it. I didn't feel a wave of shock, no boiling heat under my skin, just a dry, certain kind of disappointment. Like looking at your own handwriting and realizing someone forged your signature, perfectly. I saw Mom near the entrance, chatting with someone from the board. I walked up to her without rushing, without ceremony. She turned mid-sentence and smiled. "Don't frown, Kez," she said. "It's a celebration." "That gift?" I said calmly, nodding toward the display. She followed my gaze, confused for a second, then gave a light shrug. "It's lovely, isn't it?" "It wasn't hers," I said. "You know that." She blinked, then sighed, like I was causing trouble again. "Kezia, it's all in the family." I held her stare. "Not anymore. I don't loan meaning." That's all I said. Then I turned away, walking past the buffet line, the laugh tracks, the dim lighting meant to hide sharp edges. Near the catering station, I spotted a familiar face, Benji, one of the assistant managers. We'd gone to the same high school back in the day. He probably didn't remember, but he was the kind of person who paid attention when most people didn't. I handed him the folder and said, "You'll want this before the final speech." He looked at me curiously, but didn't ask, just nodded. And that was it. No announcement, no fireworks, just done. I walked out through the service door, into the loading dock where staff took breaks between shifts. It was quiet out there, cold but honest. I leaned against the railing and looked up at the sky. Blank, gray, endless. Let her call it loyalty. I'll call it the last time. Back inside, the temperature had shifted. Not the actual air, but the energy. There was a pause in the evening, that low murmur of voices settling into silence, the lull just before a big moment. I didn't go back to the seat I was never given. I remained near the edge of the room, close to the AV station, where the technician hovered over a laptop, prepping the final segment. The tribute. The lights dimmed gradually. Conversations faded into hushes. Glasses clinked a final time. And then the screen lit up. It began with soft music and images of Brindis as a child, smiling in playgrounds, standing in front of trophies, hugging our grandmother. Each slide moved into another chapter of her career, each voiceover layering praise like frosting. She's a visionary, a mentor, someone who leads with heart. Then came the part where they usually acknowledge support systems, family, siblings, mentors. Except there was no sibling. My name never came up. Not in captions, not in photos, not even in the scripted narration that some PR person probably wrote. There were shots of our family, but I wasn't in them. Cropped, omitted, or simply never invited when they were taken. I didn't even realize my hand had moved to my purse until I felt the cool metal of the USB. By the time the video faded to black, the applause began rising, and I walked. Not fast, not hesitant either, just steady, controlled. I stepped onto the stage from the side, not where speakers usually entered. There was a brief flicker of confusion in the audience, the kind of moment where everyone pretends they're not watching until they realize they can't look away. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't make eye contact with Brindis. I walked straight to the laptop, placed the USB beside it, and turned toward the tech guy, Benji. He looked at me. I nodded once. Nothing dramatic. Behind me, Aveline stood near the edge of the crowd. She'd been waiting, not asked, not instructed. Just ready. She stepped forward, tapped a few keys, and clicked play. The screen changed. The music stopped. No voiceover this time. Just slides. My original slides. The ones I had stayed up until 3 a.m. refining. Timestamps. Metadata. Author listed as Keziah Rowe, not Brindis Langford. A short pause. Then an overlay. Brindis's final version, used in her keynote speech 2 months ago. Identical structure. Same visuals. Copy-pasted lines, including one sentence I'd typed in a daze while half asleep at the kitchen table. All I needed was a chance. That sentence had been her closing quote. Now the audience saw where it came from. The room didn't erupt. There were no gasps, no dramatics. But it froze. The CEO, Brindis's direct superior, turned slightly in his chair, looking at her, then back to the screen. Marlene's face, just a few rows in, went pale. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, lips tight, and the applause that had started to swell died. The video ended. The screen went dark. I didn't bow, I didn't smile. I turned and walked off the stage. There was no music to cue my exit, no MC rushing to smooth things over. I made it halfway to the side door when I heard it, soft but unmistakable. A single pair of hands clapping. I glanced back. A junior designer, maybe 23, was the only one standing. He looked nervous but determined. Then he stopped. No one joined him. He sat back down. But it was enough. I kept walking until I reached the far end of the hallway again. I leaned against the cool plaster and let out a long, controlled breath. She wanted applause, I thought, but I brought silence louder than anything she's ever heard. I hadn't reached the parking lot yet when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, uneven, heels against concrete. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could already picture my mother's coat flaring as she caught up, and the way Brindis would follow 2 steps behind, like she always did when Mom was ready to do the talking. "Wait!" Marlene called out, her voice cutting through the cold air. "We need to speak, right now." I stopped just short of the lot, near the edge where the curb sloped into a snow-dusted sidewalk. The sky above the venue had gone a deeper gray, nearly black at the edges, and the only sound was the wind catching the edge of the rental tent behind us. "You humiliated your sister in front of her entire company," she said, breathless, eyes narrowed. Do you even realize what you've done to this family? I turned slowly. Which family is that? I asked. The one that doesn't even let me in the picture? Brenda stood a few feet back, her expression unreadable. The way she held her clutch in both hands told me she wasn't there to argue. She was just hoping Mom could clean it up like always. I should have known better, Marlene hissed, her voice tight with that special kind of disappointment she reserved just for me. Your sister has built a name, a reputation, and you drop a grenade in the middle of it because what? You weren't in a slideshow? I held her stare. You keep calling her reputation earned, but all she did was borrow everything that made mine invisible. Brenda stepped forward, finally finding her voice. You could have said something to me, privately. You don't do private, I replied, calm as still water. You do public praise and private theft. Her mouth opened, but I kept going. You've told people for years that you supported me, that you made space for me, but you didn't support me. You positioned me, just close enough to serve your image, just far enough to never threaten it. Brindis blinked, her expression faltering. That's not fair. No, I said. It's not. And you've benefited from that imbalance for a very long time. There was no yelling, no door slamming, just the hard, measured silence of someone who's already walked through fire and has no interest in going back inside the building. I turned to leave again. You're overreacting, Marlene called after me. You've always been too sensitive. This is why we didn't include you more. Everything becomes about you. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. On my way across the lot, I saw him, leaning against a car that looked too new for him, Dorian. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. High school classmates, almost somethings. We'd lost touch when my world closed in after graduation. He tilted his head as I passed, then straightened. Kazia? I paused. Yeah. His brows lifted, recognition settling in slowly. I didn't recognize you. Sorry, it's been years. I nodded, offering a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. That's okay, I said. I'm still learning to recognize myself too. We stood there a second longer, both knowing this wasn't a beginning or an end, just a footnote. Then I kept walking. My car was cold, and the seatbelt buckle shocked my hand when I reached for it. I turned the ignition, letting the heater groan to life, and stared out at the windshield as it started to fog. No one followed me. No one knocked on the window, begged for a redo, or even asked if I was okay. And that silence was perfect. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over a blank message, then opened my drafts. Still there. The message I never sent to Aveline. Thank you for treating me like I was actually here. I hit send. Within seconds, 3 dots appeared. Her reply came quickly. Anytime. I stared at that single word, exhaled, and let my grip on the steering wheel loosen. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't victory. It was something better. This time, I left the party, but I didn't leave myself behind. The next morning came quietly. No dramatic sunlight through the windows, no sudden feeling of triumph. Just the gentle clink of my spoon against a chipped mug as I stirred instant coffee in my apartment. The kind of silence that's earned, not imposed. My phone buzzed once on the counter. The message preview read, FYI, check internal memo board, Aveline. I opened the company portal. There, buried between budget updates and holiday party thank yous, was a quiet correction issued by HR. Acknowledgement of an oversight in authorship regarding the Q3 international presentation. No names, no accusations. But it was enough. No scandal, no headlines. Just the truth. Tucked into a corner, quietly present. That was how change starts. Not with noise, but with something that refuses to stay buried. I sipped my coffee and walked over to the fridge. A photo was magneted to the top left corner, one from a family vacation to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I was probably 13 in that picture. Everyone else was smiling on the dock. I was in the background, out of focus, half in the frame, half not. I used to keep it there as a reminder of where I came from, of what it meant to be included in the Langford household. Now it didn't sting. It just felt over. I didn't need to be in the picture anymore. Not theirs, anyway. Later that afternoon, I opened my inbox again. Buried beneath spam from online newsletters I forgot to unsubscribe from was a message with a subject line that read, "We'd still love to have you, Keziah." It was from a nonprofit I'd once interviewed with, years ago, back when I declined the role because Grandma had just started needing full-time help. They remembered my application, said they'd come across my writing recently, probably through one of the internal circles that Aveline's quiet memo had trickled into. They were opening the role again, and I was at the top of their list. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop without replying. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I wanted to sit with the feeling for a minute of being wanted for what I actually did, not who I supported. By early evening, I went for a walk. No real destination, just downtown, where the city was already dressed in string lights and cold wind. The sky hung low, heavy with unfallen snow, like it was waiting for permission. I passed a local gallery on 10th and Emerson. Its windows were steamy, the kind of fog that clung to glass from breath and bodies. Inside, people wandered among minimalist displays, light installations, abstract canvases. But one frame in the front window stopped me cold. It was empty. Beneath it, a small card read, "The one who was always there." I stood still for a full minute. Then I took out my phone and snapped a picture. Not for Instagram, not to send to anyone, just for me. Back home, I stood in the kitchen with my coat still on and typed a message to Aveline. "I'm not coming to Sunday dinners, but if you ever want a real one, let's plan something that matters." She replied within seconds. "Deal, you bring dessert." The microwave beeped behind me, the sound grounding. I hadn't cooked. I just reheated leftover soup from 2 nights ago. Still, it tasted different. Not better, just mine. Later, I opened my journal. It had been untouched for months, maybe longer. I wrote one line across the page, slowly. "This isn't revenge. This is reclamation." And beneath it, almost without thinking, "I don't need their frame. I've built my own." Sometimes the people who claim to love us the most are the ones who silence us first. Not always with cruelty, sometimes just with convenience, or comfort, or shame. But silence, even when quiet, can still be loud enough to erase you. I used to believe that if I stayed small, stayed useful, stayed out of the way, I'd eventually be invited in. But here's what I've learned. Being quiet to keep the peace isn't peace at all. It's postponement. And eventually, your truth will want to be heard, whether you whisper it or walk it to the front of a stage. To anyone watching who has ever felt invisible in your own family, like your value was measured only in what you could give, not who you are, I see you. And more importantly, I hope you start seeing yourself too. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever stepped out of a role that was assigned to you, but never truly fit you? Have you ever kept the peace so long you forgot what your voice even sounded like? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments, or just tell me where you're watching from. I read everything, and I want to hear your voice. And hey, if you didn't like this story, I respect that too. Tell me why. Tell me what part didn't sit right. Let's make this a space where honesty is welcome. If this video meant something to you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. We have more real, human, and deeply personal journeys coming, and I'd love to have you walk with us. Thank you for listening.